Welcome, everybody. Welcome to the Crypt once again. Thank you guys so much for joining us for what is going to be another great interview with an amazing guest. And before I get my guest on, I just want to ask you two very, very simple questions. Do we live in a slave system? That's question one. And question two, are you a slave? I think these are very important questions, and definitely have a guest that's going to be on very, very shortly. But before I introduce them, I just want to let you know a little bit about them. They do have the YouTube channel, Nature is the Answer. You can also find them on the One Great Work Network. And they are also the author of two books. And one of them is one I'm reading right now, which I'm going to show to you guys. Slavery, Gone for Good. Right here. An amazing book that they sent me. And I am reading it right now. I'm about halfway, about 3/4 of the way through. And so I'm just showing it to you guys because definitely I'm going to leave a link for where you can pick up this book. And I think this is a great place to start after watching this interview. So there's the book. I will show it again at the end. And I just want to go ahead and welcome my guest because I only have him here for a little bit of a time. So Cory Endrulat, I am going to go ahead. There we go. How are you doing, my friend?
How's it going? I was on your radio show before. It was very cool.
You were, yeah, an amazing guest. And actually, after our radio show, I got quite a few emails and people asking. So I sent them right away to your stuff on YouTube and at the One Great Work Network. And yeah, amazing stuff. And you're always welcome back. I thought we had a great conversation. We touched on a lot of important topics. And I think that these are topics that need to be talked about a lot more, as I was saying on the radio show. And this one, as I was saying at the beginning, is very important. And the questions I asked were, do we live in a slave system? And if so, are we slaves? And I've talked to people about this, Cory, and get a multitude of answers. Some people think that we have a little bit of slavery, which I guess it's slavery light in their eyes, I guess. And other people that are in full denial. So I wanted to get you on because I do know you talk about this a lot. And I think that maybe if we just kind of hit some bullet points that we wrote down, that it'll be a great way to kind of let people know what's going on and maybe make them look into it a little bit further. So I think it'll be great. So I think we should start, Cory, right at the, let's just get right into it. And I'll let you let people know, what is slavery?
Yeah, so slavery, when a lot of people first hear about it, they have a conception that likely came from the school system that they were raised in, especially in America, because we have a history of it, or at least it's a great part of our history. You know, we fought a whole war over it. It's called the Civil War, and the Revolutionary War was about freedom as well, but not about slave freedom, which was quite interesting. But you can see that there's a connection between these two wars, so-called, that there was a freedom wanted by human beings. There was this idea that humans are equal and therefore should not be slaves or should not be under a tyrannical system, should not be coerced to do certain things that they don't want to do. They just simply want to live their lives with freedom. And they see that, hey, why can't we express our freedom? We don't need to be under this tyrannical master or ruler. And so I kind of tie these ideas together, not just from the Revolutionary War, but the Civil War as well. And looking at the 1800s, because a lot of people tend to look at the end of the 1700s. But I say there's a lot of really good history to learn from the 1800s that a lot of people don't look at. A lot of things happened. And of course, you had the economy, the industry just growing. You had all sorts of movements growing. This is the first time you started to see all sorts of different ideologies starting to appear. So it's just a really powerful century that definitely needs to be looked at. So that's why I tend to look at that. And so if we are to just start from ground basics, what is slavery? Other than just looking at the history of it, which goes back thousands and thousands of years, not just in the 1800s, slavery could be defined by many different abolitionists back then. Abolitionists were those who wanted to end slavery. They are all going to give you some sort of definition that goes along the lines of the control, the claim of ownership of another individual. That's it. I just want to keep it really simple for people. It's just the control of another individual, the claim of ownership over another individual, saying that they're your property, or that the labor that they partake in is for your benefit and not for theirs. 100% of their labor is ultimately for your benefit in the case of chattel slavery, which is the specific type of slavery that a lot of people refer to in the 1800s. I'm saying that there's other forms of slavery, not just limited to chattel slavery. And some people might be aware of like human trafficking, for example. Sex slavery, or there is still even chattel slavery to this day. So to say that slavery doesn't exist is like, no, there's slavery actually of every form. The question is that chattel slavery is just not aggregate. It's not in the mass of society. We ended people being in balls and chains about 200 years ago in the aggregate, meaning, that you had basically a slave master on every plantation. You had a farm, and every single farm had slaves. You don't see that anymore. You're probably going to see some farms that still do those practices, like I said, but they're not going to be everywhere like they were back then. And the reason why is because of the abolitionists, is because of the freedom ideas, is because of those people who really questioned the status quo and said, well, do we really need this system? Are these people equal like us? Do they have a thing called rights? And could we define what those things are as well? Because once we start to really question what those basic things are, these birthrights, these things that make us equal as human beings, then we start to actually follow that path. We follow it through actionably. And that's where we see the major innovations in history, is where people start to apply their consciousness toward intent within the universe, a universal intention, a telos, a purpose, may you say. This is the cause of every religion, it's the cause of every political party, the cause of every science, is to find the purpose within the universe, the underlying meaning, the value. And a lot of people may just want to take a mechanistic view and say things just happen randomly, there's just causes and effects, but then what's the point of us studying them? The point of us studying them and looking at history so that way we don't repeat the things that we see are tyrannical and chaotic and crazy. So that's why I'm here saying, man, what if we look at the slavery of the past? If we can't define what slavery is now, well, what if we're enslaved right now? And a lot of what's happening in today's world, which we're going to give examples of, is slavery or different forms of slavery. And so once we look at that, we can realize, wait, it's not gone. And perhaps it's because we can't define it, even though it's as simple as the claim of ownership over the life or property of another. But notice I said life and property. It could be maybe 100% of your property is taken from you in the case of chattel slavery. Your whole life, you have to do everything for your master. But what about 50%, 40%, 20%? Is any percent of your life and your property belong to somebody else? Any percent at all? Because that is the question here. We look at this thing called taxation, right? And this is a prime example of somebody saying, hey, your property, that of which you earn, must be taken from you for the greater good. They make these justifications as if somehow you can justify the means for the ends. And that's how they view it, but without looking at the specific actions. Like, do you realize that you're actually condoning theft or condoning somebody taking something from another by saying that that is justifiable? If that's justifiable for the greater good, then there's a lot of things that are justifiable for the greater good. And really, we can't really have a good because we're making justifications for it. Just facere means to create a right, not that it's actually right, but to create it. Right. And so that's what we should look at here when we're looking at slavery. Is there other forms we're not paying attention to where there's justifications being made for these forms to stay in existence, just as back in the 1800s, there was slavery, and many abolitionists were like, man, this is wrong. Why should you enslave somebody? But everybody would be like, well, it's necessary for the economy. Oh, well, it's enslavement. But if we didn't have slaves, we wouldn't have the economy. Oh, if we didn't have slaves, we wouldn't have cotton. They make all these justifications, and the list just goes on and on and on of just trying to keep this immoral act that they know is immoral, but just have to hold on to because they've either been trained into it, born into it, propagandized
Right.
into it, can't imagine a worldview without it, don't want to take action about it. And so that is exactly what's happening today. You say it's cowardice or the lack of courage to want to change the world and create freedom. But it's more than that. It is that, but that will has to be developed. That strength of the mind and of courage needs to be developed. It's not something we can just say, "All right, we're free. Let's just embrace it." We have to know what that is first of all before we can
I
even
agree.
put that into action.
Yeah, you have to know what freedom is before you can get it going, and that's a true thing. And I think that learning about what the meaning of words has, it's really important, and something I really enjoy doing. As you know, I tell you about that like when we talk off air that I like looking up meanings of words. I've learned words from you, and from
Etymology.
it is, and I think that people don't realize the power in words and even the words they're saying what they mean. So I love the way that you're kind of breaking it down and teaching people that because I think it's important. And you were saying that a lot of people when you think of slavery, you think about balls and chains and that's what people automatically think because they don't see that it's not going on. And I try to tell people that just because you don't see it, it's just changed form. It's there. It's just in a different form. You don't. Yeah, there's no ball and chains, but there. In some cases, I think this is more dangerous because you don't see it is openly glaring as it would be if somebody was in shackles and kind of stuck
Yeah.
doing stuff. So I think that's really important to bring out. And I think another good point. Can you let people know what are the symptoms of slavery?
Okay, well, yeah, to first touch on what you first said, I think that's really important
Okay.
is um, people don't really see it and it's harder to really see like, oh yeah, somebody's not being chained up, so therefore slavery's not happening.
Yep.
No, that's not necessarily the case. The abolitionists of the past, and a lot of them, I have their quotes, especially in the book that you're talking about. I mean, more than half of the book is just quotes from the abolitionists. They weren't just pointing to chattel slavery. They were pointing to a lot of other forms of slavery. They were looking at the nature of what slavery is itself, minus the term that you put in front of it,
Okay.
whether it's prostitution, child, or chattel, or political, or economic, or whatever slavery you want to say it is. Slavery is slavery, right?
Yep.
So I just want to make that point clear. It's like, yeah, it's going to be harder to detect in certain forms, but that's just because they're different forms of slavery.
Exactly.
And so if we can just understand what slavery is, period, then it would make it easy to really understand all the other forms. So if it is just the claim of ownership over the life or property of another, now what you're asking me is how do we tell that that is going on? And
Right.
so
Very important.
there's actually a section within the book that asks this very question. It says, what are the symptoms of slavery? It says control, war or conflict, trauma, fear, including the fear of freedom, democide, and the lack of love, knowledge, sovereignty, freedom, and order. So democide is the number one cause of unnatural death. This is, for example, World War II, right, where you have so much casualty, millions and millions of deaths. And, a lot of people are like, man, we don't want this to happen again because they have consciences. They realize, man, this is wrong what the Nazis did, what the communists did, what all these nations of the world did, even America contributing to these nations and going into wars that nobody wants to participate in. Just the whole idea of war. I mean, does anybody ever win? I mean, that is a symptom, however, of slavery because people are fighting a war that most likely they don't want to fight in,
Hmm.
and they're putting others, coercing their lives into violence. Somebody might be living in Germany and get bombed the next day. Somebody might be living in London and get bombed the next day. They didn't ask for that.
Yep.
Their own
Yep.
life and property is being breached upon by outside forces without their consent. And so you have fear, including the fear of freedom. If you are in fear, well, first of all, you can't even think. You're contracted.
Yeah, I
Um,
say that all the time. If you're in that state of fear, you're not consciously thinking, you're reacting.
Right, right. It's not, there's some people want to say a difference between the response and a reaction, right? If you're just reacting to something, it's different from actually giving a response where
Right.
you're consciously taking that in and doing what you must do, that you feel like you must do based on the knowledge that you have. Fear, no, when you're in fear, it's like, oh, please, please, whatever I can do to get out of this condition. And you're not really maybe thinking it through, like, why am I in fear? Maybe it's really hard. Fear is something that attacks our instincts, right?
Yep.
So our instincts is a whole different part of us because, of course, we have our conscience and our high order thinking, and then we have our instincts. And those instincts often get played on through these systems of control. Because if you're the slave and you're, disobeying your master, well, he's going to probably whip you in
Yep.
the 1800s, right? And you're going to feel pain, and that pain is going to make you want to be a better slave. Unfortunately, it works because fear puts the trauma inside of you, so that way you fear your freedom more and more. You might try to escape. You say, man, I have this high order conscience, but then they catch you and then they whip you, and it's like now you have no choice but to obey your instincts and obey your fear, and you can't rise above who you are ultimately destined to be, because you're meant to be free.
Right.
Nobody comes out of the womb with chains on them,
Very true.
saying
Yep.
you are a slave. No, nobody comes out of the womb like that. As far as I see, you're just a baby of a mother, of a dad. You don't have a birth certificate or any particular papers required for that baby, or vaccinations or whatever man-made thing required for that baby. That baby, just in its pure essence, that pure state, is a baby. It's just a product of the mother and father.
Right.
We've added all these other things onto it, and a lot of people like to go into the birth certificate and how much that causes problems later on in life. That is enslavement. If something's happening to you as a baby, I mean, you can't even consent to that. You can't even think for yourself what's going on at the time, and your life is being signed away to some foreign corporation, and they're making a straw man of your name, and all the letters you get in the mail now is in full capitals. It's like, you're a baby. How are you supposed to know any of that is happening? So
Yeah,
a lot of
that's
people,
crazy. When I started looking into that about birth certificates,
yeah.
that's an eye opener, and I don't think a lot of people realize. Like, start looking into that about and you're right. You're not even old enough to consent to anything, and right away they're putting you in the system. You're becoming a slave so young.
Yeah, so that's an example a lot of people use, and that's just one type of example where it's like, man, I was a kid. How could I have known? And then why did the parents do it? Well, because it was custom. It's just natural to do.
Yep.
Well, does that make it right? Does that make it just? Does that make it natural just because, everybody's doing it? So other signs of understanding that slavery exists include a lack of health, few possessions, or the lack of knowing or ownership thereof those possessions, or restriction of movement. Am I able to go from country to country without some sort of documentation?
Nope.
Am I able to go drive a car across, my land without some sort of documentation? Am I able to trade with somebody independent of any third party if I want to? And if I ask anybody, like, would you want to be able, like, if you have an apple and your neighbor has an orange, would you want somebody to be like, hey, make sure there's taxes between this, make sure somebody's watching this. This is a really, like, do you really want somebody watching that trade between those two individuals, or do they have the right to trade with each other independent of any third party if they want to? The difference there is if they want to,
Exactly.
right? If they want to be free to do what they want with their own property, the food that they grew, the body that they have, to move, to walk, to run, etc. That's movement. A slave had to be on the plantation, had to get permission, receipts to go from plantation to plantation. And the master had to know every part of where he went. There wasn't technology and mass surveillance to do it back then, but you might relate that to now.
Exactly.
And few possessions, yeah, that can happen. Of course, you have that famous slogan from the World Economic Forum that you will own nothing and you will be happy.
Yep.
So if you don't know about that, well, that's just a little tad bit to just throw in there. We'll talk a bit more about that one. And a lack of health, because slaves are not going to necessarily be treated in the best way. You might relate that to nowadays where a lot of people are eating junk food or fast food, but honestly, sometimes they don't have a choice because they don't have enough money and they're trying to get by. And I can't blame them, if they're falling again to their instincts or their temptations, or there's people who are manipulating their taste buds into eating certain foods, and then people are basically enslaved into eating certain foods. You can relate this to health. Oh, I'm like coffee. I'm addicted to coffee. I'm addicted to sugar. I'm addicted to dairy. And like these things, although they can be healthy potentially, depending on, the way you look at it and how it's taken and moderation, etc., these things can enslave people. But that's a choice for themselves, ultimately. If the slave is unaware of what's happening to themselves, is unaware of their lack of control, then they're enslaving themselves. That there is a part where they're not just being enslaved by somebody else, but that they're enslaving themselves.
Yeah.
So,
And I think a lot of people, Corey, would you not agree that that's what's going on now, right? Is that people are willingly enslaving themselves, not even realizing it. I think that
yeah,
they've got the system, the mind controllers of the world got this so down to an art that they're basically making us do it to ourselves, and we don't even realize it. A lot of people.
well, a lot of people want to do it to themselves too if they're convinced of the fact that it might be good for them, right?
Very
Oh, it's
true.
I take
Yep.
this vitamin, I'm gonna have a healthier heart, I'm gonna have a healthier body, and do they really know if it's gonna actually make them healthier? And by them saying, well, it's gonna make me healthier, they sort of become dependent on it. Like, yeah, I need this to become healthy. And if
Hmm.
somebody and everybody tells them and everybody's doing it, it's like, well, okay, I feel like I have to do it. But do
Yep.
you really have to do it? And, is it something that's natural, essential, right for you to do? Again, like that is the question. Is slavery natural and essential for society? Well, we found out chattel slavery is not natural and essential to society
Correct.
when we abolished it in the 1800s. And again, it's still present in some fields, of course. It's going to happen in different areas, especially if we put our guard down. But ultimately, because people's guard up is so high now, because they realize it's an immoral thing to do,
Right.
it's not going to be done. It's not even going to be tried. I mean, are you going to try chaining somebody to a wall and say,
No.
I own you? I mean, no, unless you're really wacko. And at this point, people would just be like, man, you're mentally ill. Like you need help. Like
Yep.
people now recognize that. But back then, I mean, it's like daily practice. It's part of the law. If you don't have a slave, there's penalties. If the slave does something bad, there's penalties for the slave. Like the law was built around the slave system. A lot of people
Correct.
don't know this. Even the slave patrol, which has its roots in modern day policing. The whole police structure of today, of them watching the streets and waiting for people, comes from the slave
Yep.
patrol, where they would wait and see, well, are there slaves who are escaping the plantations? So, okay, that doesn't necessarily prove that we're slaves, but why is it then that we have slave patrols today?
It's
you know,
very
you
true.
have to you have to question that. What is the role of law enforcement? If we look at Nazi Germany, the law enforcement, they're just doing their job. They're upholding the public law. Well, they obviously also committed mass atrocity. I mean,
Exactly. Yep.
how could following orders necessarily constitute what is right and wrong? It can't. And we'll talk about that more. But these symptoms that we're talking about, they manifest in the macro and micro, otherwise known as the individual and collective. So let's say one person is with a lack of freedom for themselves. It's likely because, well, the other people around them probably have a lack of freedom within themselves,
Hmm.
or as above, so below, as we may say in the principle of correspondence, in the Hermetic principle. That is something that we can look at always is, at an individual level, what is it that people are doing? And does that reflect what the rulers or those above us are doing? And maybe there's a relationship between them, which is why things are the way they are. So if we can change ourselves, we ultimately change what's above, or change what happens, what manifests into the world, right? If the whole world recognizes that slavery is wrong, as in the 1800s, then slavery is not going to be a mass condition, at
Correct.
least chattel slavery. So the conditioning of the condition of slavery occurs where individuals may soon simply follow orders in order to get by, even if the order is not right, since morals are out of the question and outright violated. See, when we look again at the 1800s, a lot of people justified slavery. They didn't use morality as a justification for slavery. They used everything else that they can find under the sun to not address morality.
Yep.
Because if somebody was addressed the moral question, they kind of want to avoid it. Is slavery moral? Is it immoral? It's like, no, well, it's necessary for economy. Oh, we can't live without it. Oh, it's how will this happen? It's like, you didn't answer my question.
Exactly.
And that's exactly what the abolitionists did. And they had newspapers and they pressed upon people and pressed upon them and say, hey, you still didn't answer the question. Like, is it right or wrong? Does that matter to us? What is right and wrong? Or is it just, whatever we want and we can just be God and do whatever we want? Because then what's our result condition ultimately? Do we care about other beings? Do we care about equality? Do we care about justice? Like, is there even such a thing as justice? Because if there is, then yeah, we probably care to some extent, hopefully, about right and wrong.
Exactly. I agree. And that's the scary part too that I've learned asking people a lot of questions, Corey, is that a lot of people can't even tell you what a right is, like a simple definition. And that's why I keep telling people that's why we're losing our rights so quickly and we're losing our freedom quickly, because people don't even know what the definition is. And it's such a simple definition, that not to cause harm to another sentient being. And people don't know that. It's very shocking when you ask people. You get a lot of weird answers from people, but they don't know. So how can they fight for it? How can they defend it if they don't even know what it is? It's
Okay, so yeah, we can approach this in different ways because some people might know that answer and a lot of people may not, right? Because we
Yep.
don't necessarily learn that through school, but
Oh, for sure.
ultimately, if we say these rights come from nature and not man, then there's a different authority at play, and I think that's really where we can hit the nail. Is rather than defining what right and wrong is or what rights are, if we're going to apply them in an action sense to say they're correct and moral, we can do that, but we should also be aware that a right action produces right results.
Correct.
As Richard Wetherell would say in his book Right is Might, very good book that goes over
Correct. Yep.
general ethics. I think it's a very good book because you're not really necessarily looking for a definitive answer. You're recognizing where those rights come from, and then from there, you kind of already have the answer. And to some extent, the same thing with slavery. I feel like people already kind of know what it is.
Mm-hmm.
Because they have some sort of background of what it is based on history. And to them, I think it is about control over another individual. It's just about how they apply it. And again, if you're going to put those rights in the hands of others and say, well, rights are determined by pieces of paper or by man-made authority, then those rights are not natural.
Exactly.
If you're going to look at slavery and say, well, slavery is dependent on this piece of paper, that piece of paper, it's like, well, wait, is it actually immoral? Is it actually moral? Like that's a natural question. It's questioning our nature. Like, are we meant to be enslaved? Are we meant to be free? So the questions that we ask have to really be rooted in nature. That's ultimately what I have to say. And so, the definition I will give is that a right does not violate the nature of another. And
That's
again,
a
you could,
good way. Yes, that's a good one.
I think just because it hits at the root and you can address other topics with it, not limited to just actions. But of course, if you do want to just look at actions, yeah, you can address it in the sense of harm. Like, does it cause harm to somebody or does it not? That's how you can understand right versus wrong. That is definitely cool with me because it's observable. If you have a world of chaos, versus a world where you see there's not much chaos. The big difference is the morality of that society.
100%.
Or even if you were to look at if that society is free or not. Well, let's think about it. What's required for freedom? If a slave wants to be free, they need to, what? Be in control of themselves. And to be in control of themselves, they need to know themselves. But they need to know themselves, so knowledge is required for freedom. That's interesting because, a lot of people may describe freedom as this chaotic state of nature where there's just all this going on and nobody knows what's happening. Well, is freedom really chaos if freedom by definition is required by sovereignty, by understanding yourself, by knowing that you are free? Because if you can't be responsible for your own freedom or recognize that you are free, will you ever be free? This is how the slaves ultimately freed themselves. The abolitionists were there to support them, but they weren't the ones to be like, hey, slave, you're free. You have to understand this. Let's brainwash you. No, they didn't. The abolitionists did not force the slaves to do anything. That would be counterintuitive to their cause. The abolitionists were educators. They were like, hey, slaves, you have rights. Do you know that? You own yourself. You know that? And slave master, you have no right to enslave your slave or even to call yourself a slave master and to call this person a slave. And they were just educators. They're facilitators. And what are they facilitating? They're facilitating the natural condition of those beings to say, hey, you're just a person and they're just a person. There's no difference between you two. So
Exactly.
so that's where we can understand rights. It's just at a basic sense of understanding slavery or understanding nature. Whatever way you want to look at it, you're going to come to the same conclusion because you're not depending on man-made authority for the answer. You're not depending on some piece of paper or legislation. You're looking at the intent of the universe, the purpose, the telos, like I talked about. So that is different than looking at, well, like I said, somebody and their whim, their opinion of what right and wrong is. That is what we call moral relativism.
And I
And
think
there's,
that's rampant in the world right now. It really is. And I think that that's the major problem, is that people believe that other people have more rights than others, right? And we got to get past that and realize that we all have the same rights. And
it's
as you're
not,
speaking,
yeah.
natural law, like natural law, which I'm very big on talking about on this show. As people know, I talk about it on here, on my radio show. I think that and doing the work on yourself. I love, Cory, that you brought that up too, because I think the shadow work, which is what I call it, that you have to do on yourself too. I think that's where it all starts. I always say that that's the foundation that you have to start with and then build off of that. If you don't do the work on yourself, then how are you ever going to get teaching it to other people or pointing in the right direction? So I love the way that you said that.
Yeah, it is definitely required that if you want to be free for yourself, you have to free yourself.
Yeah.
Somebody can help you. Somebody can defend you. They could defend you and your rights, yourself, your body, because somebody's trying to do violence upon you. And you could defend somebody else as well. But ultimately, you have to be the one to be in defense of yourself, because that person's not going to always be there to defend you.
Yep, sure.
And that person is not you. So, you can hire somebody, say, hey, I want you to protect me. That's a voluntary agreement, by the way. It's not police.
Yep.
And,
Big difference.
even in that case, though, you have to recognize that, well, they can help you, but they're not fully responsible for what you are. You have to realize still where the obligation is, where the right is, and that ultimately belongs with you and you alone. You have to be responsible for that. And, responsibility, ownership, sovereignty, these ideas is what creates freedom. This is freedom from slavery.
Correct.
Slavery requires no knowledge of those things. The slaves in the 1800s did not know how to read or write. I mean, that right there is a clear sign. It's like, how would they ever know that they would be free or to express their intelligence if we recognize that intelligence, that rationality, reason is what allows us to recognize that we're all free and that we have a purpose and meaning and value. They're not allowed to think like that because they're just working all the time, constantly working and having to do what other people tell them to do. Is there a lot of people in today's world that are working really hard, that are constantly going every single day, that are just following orders of what people are telling them to do,
Yep.
and then also conceiving that as right and wrong, legality as morality? Because then we're not seeking nature at all. In fact, we're moving far away from it, which is why I talk about nature is the answer and why I wrote my second book. But the point is that you could understand just slavery and everything else falls together, which is why I made the book, and it's structured in a way where it's just question, answer, question, answer, question, answer.
Yep.
So that way you can go back to each question and then connect each question with another. It's powerful in that sense. I wanted to make it as simple as possible for people. And so that was my intention.
It's amazing. I'm really enjoying it. I love the way you have it laid out, just the way you described it, because you can keep going back and then looking, and it just builds off of each other. And I love that. I really do recommend, guys, that you do get this book, because it's going to help you a lot and help you understand the way things are and how we got here. And I just really enjoy the book so far. So I'm glad you're talking about and even quoting from your book, which I think is amazing. Letting people know what they're going to see and read in there. And I love the way that you did say that, though, that, people have to take ownership of themselves, too. I think that's so important, because I think a lot of people are busy pointing their finger at everybody else or everything else and not at themselves. So I think that people have to start taking accountability for their actions, and they're not a lot of people. I think that it's like, as you were saying, it begins with yourself and educating yourself too in a lot of in these aspects and these terms too, all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, so and when you mention rights, some people want to be very strict about, what rights are because they want to get strict about, hey, I own myself, you own yourself.
Yep.
And I'm perfectly cool with that. But also just understand for those people out there who want to get strict on that, you could use other ways to describe it. Like, obviously, I gave some examples. You can look at it through the lens of slavery. You can look at it through the lens of nature.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be limited to certain word usages. It could cause a lot of philosophical debates and problems that you might not want to get into. And so, and trust me, I know, because, I've ran into it and I've had experiences. I've talked to a lot of different people. And, one of the things that you came to me questioning about was, can we prove more so that people are slaves? And
Mm-hmm.
somebody might be watching, they still aren't convinced, like, well, it's not chattel slavery, so why should I be concerned? It's not slavery. Like, it's not something that concerns me. I'm just still living my life. I'm doing my thing. But my question to you is, are your freedoms being impeded upon? Like, are there forces at work that are messing with your freedoms? And is
Yep.
that becoming increasingly known? Why is that? Why is it that your freedoms are going away in different parts of the world, or a lot of other people, even if it's not just yourself? Do you see that there's a lot of tension within the world, or chaos, and people unknowing of what's happening? Because I will make the tie and say that some slavery is happening, even if it's in the case of tyranny.
Mm-hmm.
Because the founding fathers used the same terminology to represent tyranny as slavery. And a lot of people over these past hundreds of years saw America moving in the direction of tyranny more and more as it continued to exist. And people still don't realize the underlying reason why things are becoming more tyrannical.
Right.
Right? Why the systems of control are becoming more controlling. Perhaps it's because they're systems of control. You ever think about that? So let's look at some of the mechanisms that they use, right?
Yeah, like
We have a list.
that's great. We came up with some that I think that are amazing to touch on and are going to get people thinking, because this
Mhm.
is what I use when I talk to my people around me or my friends or even family. I kind of bring up these some of these examples, and it does make them think, because I don't think people really sit down and give it enough thought. So let's cut the first ones that we came up was licenses and permits. So break that one down for us, Corey.
Sure. Well, first, also before we talk about that, going back into the idea of rights, is so long as you're not giving away your conscience or your rights to others, it's not really an issue. However way you wish to define those rights, I just want to put that out there, because
Okay.
again, you're not putting it into man-made authorities' hands. And if you're seeking nature as your authority, then automatically you're sort of looking at an objective source, or you're trying to find the truth, which, of course, is not man-made. It's something that is truthful. It's a law. That's why we call it natural law. And I encourage people to look into that perspective. I have many resources on that. So now we're going to talk about man-made law going into this.
Yep.
And because I'm saying slavery still exists, I have a quote that I did in my recent video that you watched,
Yeah, it was a
right,
great
about
video.
how slavery still exists. There's a quote in there by a guy named Salmon Chase, and he talks about how the government comes to assist every slaveholder because private force is not strong enough to create slavery, let alone maintain it. So organized force would be necessary to create that condition to begin with. And if you look at the history of governments, the very first government was Sumeria. They were also the birthplace of slavery.
Yep.
And that was about 6,000 years ago. And according to, what we can understand, of course, from the history. And, that's when they started making these man-made laws and giving punishments. And some of the most bizarre things, if you look at their law codes, like if you do this, you get your hand chopped off. If you do this, you get your eye gorged off. It's like, okay, who decides these rules?
There's still crazy laws if you look into some,
Right.
like there's
Can't collect
still
rainwater.
don't even get me started on that one. I'm learning that the hard way in my
So,
area.
and so let me ask the person who's watching this, does that seem sane to you? Does that seem normal? And if somebody does try to collect rainwater or do something like that, where they're not harming anybody, they're not harming anybody, and they're not doing anything that most people would see as wrong,
Mm-hmm.
then why is it an issue?
Huge
um,
fines here, Corey, if you get caught collecting rainwater. I couldn't believe it. How big the
so
fines are if you get caught with a bucket of water. Like,
that just shows you that pieces of paper have a lot of rule over our lives. I mean, let alone money, right? Which is also used as a piece of paper.
yep,
So our lives are ran by pieces of paper. You know, people want to say it's the elites, it's these people. It's like, it's just pieces of paper.
yep,
But it's not really them, right? Because we're enforcing that. We're saying, hey, yeah, that such a system should exist. Oh, it's democracy. Oh, it's this. Oh, we're part of it. Oh, we got to change it. But we're not really looking at the underlying situation. Like, is that paper actually right to exist? Like, are we supposed to worship papers? Are we supposed to have people in positions where we respect them with certain authorities and give them more rights that don't exist? Because if you say that rights are natural and that they're God-given and not man-made, then how could you say that you can give rights that don't
right,
exist to people? So that's another thing to throw out there. So when we look at licenses and permits, just break down the words. Permit means permission. So if you are asking for permission to do something, whether it be traveling, driving, of course, driving is the bad term because it means commercial use in the corporate terms. But if, let's say, you're traveling, you're walking, you're running, what have you, and they're like the politicians or whoever it has the power
yep,
somehow to say that you need a permission to do that, you need a license to do that. Do you think that's right? Do you think you should have the ability to be free in deciding, well, if you want to travel or not? And so that is a question that people can ask themselves, and that gives sense into slavery because your body belongs with you. It's your property. If somebody tells you what to do with your own property, which is your own body, that's slavery because they're claiming ownership over what you can do with your own body.
yep,
And so the same way the slave can't go off the plantation without a receipt, like we said before, the same way you can't leave your house without some license. And of course, that might even be completely true when I say leave their house, because look at, COVID,
yep,
where some
exactly.
people can't even leave their house. Like they can't even actually drive, let alone leave their own house. I mean, how much more worse could it get to the point where people still don't realize that it's slavery? And Harriet Tubman even said, one of the top quotes I put in my book is, I could have freed more slaves if I could have convinced them that they were slaves.
Exactly.
And Frederick Douglass said, I did not know I was a slave until I found out I couldn't do the things I wanted. Well, that's awfully specific. He's not saying, well, I didn't know I was a slave until I was balled up in chains, and somebody said, well, you're a different color than me. No, he's literally just saying because he couldn't do the things he wanted. There's many things that I can say I can't do because it's illegal, right?
Yep.
That means what? Does that mean I'm a slave? Well, perhaps, especially if I'm coerced against my own will to do or not do certain things, because then I'm violently complied into being what they want me to be. And so, what gives someone that power to decide what somebody else's life should be? What gives them that power to give out licenses and permits for everybody else? And why is it that everybody thinks that's legitimate? That is what we call statism.
Yep. That's a great question. It gets its power because we give it the power. Like,
Right.
it's
Just as anything else in this world, right?
exactly.
If we want something to grow, we feed it. We give it our belief. We say, yeah, this is true, it exists, and therefore it's natural, it's right. And if everybody sees it as natural or right to exist, then it's going to exist. But if everybody sees it as wrong and not natural, just as chattel slavery today, then it's not going to exist. So it's just that simple. If people are going to believe in pieces of paper and worship it, as if it's the Holy Grail and must be obeyed, or else consequences, then that's going to be a real thing. They're going to make it seem like a real thing, even though it may actually never really be a real thing in reality.
Hmm.
So that is, again, finding out our purpose. What is real? What is not real? That takes time. That takes time to realize, well, if we don't really understand the truth, then the truth is going to bite us in the butt. And that's what
For
has
sure.
happened. Democide, history, massive death, millions of deaths. That is the result of complacency, of human ignorance, of fear, of humans not knowing where they belong, of giving um, evil people permission to do evil. That's ultimately what it is. It's good people allowing evil and not realizing that's evil or allowing it to happen. And so the slave, might just give in and let himself be whipped and let himself, he might even want to be the most obedient slave because then he doesn't get whipped as much and he can stay in his peaceful slavery, as Thomas Jefferson would say, rather than dangerous freedom.
Right.
Uh, but of course, just because freedom is dangerous does not mean freedom is not destined or that freedom is not required for the human species to live on. Because think about it, without freedom, do you have any innovation? Do I have this computer, this webcam? Do I have anything? I mean, it's freedom that allows us to achieve anything in this life.
That's
And
so
that's why
true.
a slave could not own anything. That's why he had no possessions, because he couldn't own anything. He had no freedom to exercise his rights, as we may say, or exercise his conscience, to choose what to do with his life. He didn't have the choice. The choices were made for him. So it's an easy life. You can sit back. Everybody makes all decisions for you, but you don't get to live your life. There's no life to live. And that's why freedom comes before life and property, because without freedom, life is not worth living. And without life, you have no property. Without freedom, you have no property. You can't own anything without freedom. So
And it,
freedom
and they're
comes
definitely, I
first.
think, Corey, that they're designing the system. You can, when they hear them talk, that they're pushing for that, where people aren't going to own things soon. I see that with
Yeah.
home ownership. I see that with a lot of things that they are slowly. You can see them trying to steer it that way, and I think they're doing a good job. If we're not careful, that we're not going to own anything. That we are going to be. They want us totally dependent on that system. And so they're, what are they doing? They're taking away anything that you can possess, and people have to be careful because it's happening.
Yeah. Yeah, so we talked about number one, which is licenses and permits, and number two would be laws and or rights, which
Right.
we talked about. So let's say your rights again come from man, your laws come from man, then you're dependent on man for how you should live your own life, because you're saying everybody's got the same rights, they're all equal, and everybody has these rights that are to be exercised. Well, if that's the case, then how come there's people that we call authority that have the right to do things that you don't have the right to do?
Yep.
And how come they can create laws and determine what your rights are? If they claim to determine to be the source of your rights, then they're claiming to be your God or your nature, your creation,
Yep.
yourself. And that again is slavery, because if we're saying rights belong to you, it's natural to you, it's your property, then claim of ownership over your life or property.
Right.
Slavery. So number three is subjugation, coercion, or fear,
This is
right?
a good one. Yep.
Yeah, and this ties in everything as well. I mean, these are all interrelated. Again, if you don't have a certain license, you're going to be coerced into getting a license. If you don't follow a law, you're going to be coerced into following the law. Okay, so the other ones, yeah, you could have obeyed it, you could have wanted to. But if you don't, what's going to happen? And do you want to disobey? Do you not want to follow the commands of a imagined authority that people have? Then question what's going to happen to you, and then, oh my gosh, that's the reason why I don't, because it's fear. um, Fear is again what's holding people back, and it's keeping
For
people
sure.
in place to do what they continually do. What's continually brought upon them is just continually going to happen. So the slaves just again sit back, let things happen, and if they do anything wrong or questionable because they're exercising their freedom, their dangerous freedom, well, bring them back into peaceful slavery. The slave master controls them, and the slave master is benefiting off of it, off of the backs of another human being, and it's not moral at all. And in order to fix that, you need to have moral strength. You need to gather the morality of it. You need to maybe gather other people around you and
Mm-hmm.
realize and say, hey, this isn't right. We are meant to be free. We're not supposed to be in fear. I'm sick of being in fear. If there's enough of us, we don't have to be in fear.
That's what I say. Yep,
If we
exactly.
if we work together and we create free and voluntary systems, then they're not coercive by their nature. So coercion, subjugation, I mean, these are literally the terms that the abolitionists also use to directly describe what slavery is. So that is slavery, because you're being coerced, by definition, doing something against your own will.
For
Now,
sure.
again, we can talk about mental slavery versus physical slavery. Physical slavery, where you're physically being enslaved, like in the case of chattel slavery. But mental slavery will be where the slave wants to be a slave. They believe that they should be in that condition. That can be voluntary. That's not just a matter of consent. See, this is why harm matters more than just looking at consent.
Right. Yep.
So if something is right or wrong, you can say it's because it's voluntary, involuntary. Well, what about slavery? What if you want to be a slave? What if you want to be harmed? Does that mean you should be harmed? So that's why it looks a little deeper at the situation. And that is something that you can look at and say, well, do you want to be coerced, but the same action is still being committed? You're being coerced. Do you want to be in fear? Well, you probably are just then embracing it. You're embracing the fear. But if you're embracing the fear, it's probably a life contradiction. A lot of the times you had the slave master and the slave be in contradiction with themselves, because the slave wants to be free but realizes, well, he shouldn't, because, he's been trained to believe he's a slave.
Right.
And the slave master is in contradiction with himself, because he's had a slave. And it's like, man, I can't get rid of this. This is my backbone. This is how I survive. Like, this is how things work. And, and I'm used to it, and I'm not going to change it. And the slave is obviously okay with it. And so I'm okay with it. It's like, so they create excuses to just continue on immoral behavior, and therefore make it seem somewhat voluntary. But there is a question of contradiction within themselves, and this is why we have this thing called conscience. If we do something wrong, we likely know we do something wrong.
For sure.
A psychopath and a sociopath will do something wrong knowing that it's wrong and feel no guilt doing so. So there's a big difference, right? And so if you look at that, just how that works, you can relate it to slavery. Of course, I talk about it within the book. Mental slavery is that dangerous, because you could be allowing harm and think it's okay. You could be allowing wrongdoing, evil, chaos, and democide in the case of World War II, where you're just a soldier on the battlefield and just following orders, but meanwhile carrying out the deaths of millions of people. That is something that is very dangerous. So mental slavery is ultimately what needs to be looked at, because that involves individual change. So you have to question the person who's listening to this. Am I mentally a slave? Am I mentally free? Am I mentally creating the world that I want to live in? Or do I feel like there's some restrictions upon my mind and what I feel like I should do? But I can't, because either I'm physically being enslaved, whether you can't move somewhere without a license or a permit, or you're mentally enslaved because you're telling yourself that you shouldn't do something that you know that you probably could do if you find a way, or that you could do if you gather enough courage. And that's exactly what the slaves started to think about once they started to learn how to read and write. Because once you understand that you're free, or that you can become free, it's really hard to get that out of your mind.
Oh, for
Because you
sure.
start to
Right.
realize it's like, this is so important. This is so destined for humanity. And nobody else realizes this. And, maybe it's not being embraced as it should. And I realize it should. And I have a destiny now, and I have a purpose in my life. It's like, it's really going to be hard to push that down and say, I'm just going to ignore it. I'm just going to keep going with things. But if you see the ignorance of people around you, and you see all the people who are like, I'm not going to listen to you, blah, 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 they're going to give you bad comments, you might feel like, yeah, I should just give up. I should just give in. But does that mean you should give up? Does that mean you should give in? You're just going to become a mental slave again, because now you're saying you should give in to the fear of talking to other people, of giving them the courage to also free themselves. So mental slavery can be on many different types of sides. Do you see?
Oh, for sure. And do you think that that's what I noticed over the last couple of years, and I gotta be careful how I word things on here, because as you well know, YouTube will pull things if you start touching on certain subjects. But everybody knows what's happened over the last couple of years with this, pandemic or whatever you want to call it. And were you surprised how quickly people gave into that fear, because that's kind of what got me off my ass, was when I saw how quickly people bought into the fear and just complied with everything they were told to do. And that's what really gave me a gauge where I saw where humanity kind of was at, was this fear. And then I keep telling people, even after this, they have another fear bullet, I call it, in the chamber. They just constantly have this fear going. And were you surprised how quickly people got into that, like fell for that fear?
Well, to be honest, I know a lot of people woke up from seeing how other people responded. I was kind of expecting it because um, I knew prior to that that people were just vulnerable or susceptible to what comes.
Right.
I knew that, well, people don't think for themselves. So if something comes their way and they're told what to think or say or do, that they're going to think and say and do what they're told to think and say and do.
Right.
So I did kind of expect it. And that makes it worse. It makes it worse than me just waking up to the fact. It's like, shoot, I saw it coming.
For sure.
And a lot of people saw it coming, but that's because you can just look at the world around you. If people are not taking responsibility of their own lives and they're believing in these things we talk about, licenses, permits,
Yep.
laws, rights, they're being coerced and put in stages of fear, and they're not talking like this to the camera, men's talking about these subjects, they maybe don't even understand them, then yeah, it's going to become really easy for people to become an increasingly state of slavery, because slavery not necessarily has to be black and white. Somebody can increasingly become more of a slave without realizing it, because they're becoming enslaved gradually rather than immediately, right?
Very
Like
true.
it could be to the point where you don't realize it's happening, but you're allowing it. That makes it even more dangerous, in my view, because that's deception, right? But that's because people let their guard down. They let people take their country over. They let people run their own lives over,
Mm-hmm.
and so that happens. As above, so below. You see the Common Law Assembly, what they're trying to do. They're like, these people took our country over, and I'm like, these people took your life over. It's like, as above, so below. It's like, okay, that makes sense. They took everything over from who you are. Who's they? They're just other human beings. Like, and who are they to take you over? Can they really take you over? No. Ultimately, you are in control of yourself. So technically, you may want to blame them and say these people are the problem or those people are the problem, but
Yep.
still yourself. So that's why number 4 on this list is lack of
Lack
ownership
of ownership.
or
Yep.
knowing thereof. So if you don't understand that you own yourself, or don't understand that what freedom is for yourself, which is a form of property, you don't understand your rights for yourself, which is a form of property, then what ownership could you have? If you have a car and you don't keep it in good condition, you're probably not a really good car owner, are you?
Right.
And so in the case of slavery, it's like, I claim to own somebody, so I'm going to keep my slave in good health. But it's like, okay, do you even own that thing? Are you supposed to? Like, it's not a thing, it's a person.
Right.
So it's totally different in the case of slavery. But if you lack ownership within yourself, then who's controlling you? If you lack ownership to control yourself, I'm saying, who is controlling you? Because only you can control you, unless, well, you're not controlling you. Who is controlling you? Say God, maybe nature, whatever. But ultimately, somebody could take control of you. They might manipulate you. Take it, for example, a kid, who doesn't have the reason enough to take control of their own life, right? They're being developed. They're in the world and they're experimenting and they're trying to find themselves. And as a kid, you're doing your thing and you don't know everything. And even as adults, we don't know everything. We're
Mm-hmm.
still developing. But as a kid, because I think a lot of people can relate to this, they may say, "Oh, this toy is mine." The other kid is trying to say, "Oh, no, that toy is mine." They're fighting over ownership. They learn it at a very young age. It's like, wait, yeah, I should share, or it is his, or it's like you learn this stuff at a really basic level. But today, do people really understand ownership if they're so willing to coerce other people for the greater good, or for law enforcement, or for whatever, what have you, to be done for your selfish ego, your
Right.
will? So that's it's not the problem of hierarchy, it's the problem with involuntary hierarchy. of people pressing their will on others. So if you know that you own yourself, again, that's sovereignty. You're not going to become a slave. So if you lack sovereignty, you lack understanding that you should own yourself, not just that you do, then you're going to become a slave. So that right there answers number 4.
Yeah,
And
and then
then
that would lead right into what we're talking about on number 5, which is blind obedience and following orders, which is a huge one.
So following orders could be seen as statism, right?
For
Put really
sure.
simply, really simply. And statism, most simply put, other than that, is the belief in the legitimacy of slavery. So the belief that slavery can be legitimate, that you should be a slave, or that others should be a slave, or should be coerced against their will. And statism is what creates the state. That's why it's called statism. And so by the state, we refer to government, which again, coincidentally, the first government was the first form of systemic slavery. So, because again, slavery can happen from one individual to the next private force, but that private force is not strong enough, like that quote before, to accomplish a means of, organized force. And what do people refer to the government as? An organized monopoly on violence. Even Elon Musk said it in an interview. And, a lot of people are starting to catch on to just that alone. And that tells you something. It's like an organized monopoly on violence. Well, violence, slavery, violence is coercion. It's doing something to somebody against their will. So essentially, you're enslaving them to the repercussions of what you decide should happen to them. And the same thing happens with law. If you're saying something should happen to them, you're ultimately violating, hence violence, their rights.
100%.
And violating their ability to live their own life as they so choose, freely for themselves. Because again, freedom is a form of property. And again, because you're not born out of the womb with chains attached to you. So, when you're a baby, same thing. It's like you're not going to just obey everything your parents tell you in the media. Sorry, the media and in the schools and stuff like that. In fact, as a kid, you kind of are pretty rebellious. A lot of kids.
I was. I asked a lot of questions, and I've told the story a lot of times, Corey, on many of my interviews, that I asked so many questions that I spent so much time in the principal's office or in front of the class being centered out. And then that's what I kind of learned at a very young age, is that if you do start going against the system, even at a young age, they hammer in you very quickly. That you will be punished. And as I was saying, down to the principal's office, parents called in, and then if not, they would put me in front of the class and really center me out, because I was just asking questions that went against what the teacher was teaching. And I've been like that my whole life, where I love asking questions and learning, and they don't like that when they're trying to control you.
Right there, you just said it, right? They're trying to control you or get you to do what they want you to do.
Right.
Now, of course, you might make some justifications to say, well, the kid needs to learn. Well, it's like, are they learning if they're being told what to do? Is that what learning should be? Is just do what you're told? It's like, how is the kid actually learning? The kid needs to learn by learning.
Yep.
So that's a process. That's something that's not just rote learning where you just repeat it to them and indoctrinate and tell them over and over again, or force them to understand, no, that's not learning. That's not coaching, which similarly relates. Even doctor, if you go to the etymology of doctor, it turns into teacher. And if you look at coach, teacher, everything comes back down to teacher. Even the word govern can mean teacher or guide if you're actually doing that. But when people usually mean govern or teach, sometimes some teachers can be, not the best teachers. They'll tell you what to do, or they'll tell you what to think. And then that relates a lot to blind obedience, because now you're learning to just follow what is told of you to do. You're
Right.
a youngling and you're weak, and you have to follow these big humans who are like really scary and have all these tools. You don't know what they can do to you. So it's scary to be a kid in that position and to question authority, but also it's kind of enticing, because you're like, man, I'm a kid. I get to, I could have fun with them and see and get them mad. Like, so there's some, but that just shows you some of the deeper psychology of human beings from a young age, that they want to be free and they like the idea of freedom, and they think freedom is fun. because the kid wants to explore the whole world. He wants to go outside and touch every tree and climb the tree too, and fly. Who knows? The
Yep.
kid wants to do everything because he's expressing his freedom. And that's why, when I go on a dance floor, I express my freedom. I would be in school, and in high school, I went to every prom. I went to every school dance, right?
Yep.
There was phones. All the kids were on their phones. They didn't want to go on the dance floor. Oh, it's embarrassing. Oh, I don't want to dance. And it's like,
You
I'm not
went.
forced to dance, but hey, I'm just expressing my freedom. I'm just having fun,
Yep.
but oh, it's embarrassing. I don't want to be seen like this. I don't want to be seen like that. It's like, so where's your freedom? Where's your purpose? Where's the spirit within you to say like, hey, we can have some fun? And this kind of relates to the idea that, alcohol is called spirit and people need alcohol to have a good time. Why do they need alcohol to have a good time? They don't need alcohol to have a good time.
I always wondered that too. Yeah.
But that, that's just aside the point from this, obviously. Blind obedience is following orders without thinking for yourself. It's following orders because you're doing what you're told. And, a kid may not be thinking for himself if he's not learning, and he's just being told what to do. But the same way an adult will just follow orders if they're said to do this because it's their job. Like, oh, I'm a police officer. It's my duty, my job to follow orders and to carry out this law and this law and this law. But it's like, what about what's right and wrong? It's like, oh, well, that's that's what the law represents. It represents what is right and wrong, and that's decided by everybody, and everybody together gets to decide what is right and wrong by democracy, even though it's majority rule and people are still being coerced against their will, and slavery still exists in all the different forms we talked about.
Exactly.
What a contradiction. And you say, well, these contradictions are necessary, and some violence is necessary in society. Violence is necessary. And then they say government is a necessary evil.
Oh, I hear that. Oh, my Lord.
What evil is necessary in this life? Tell me. If poison hurts me, I'm not going to want to touch that poison anymore. If chaos happens every time in history, over and over and over again, where governments are rising and falling and democide is the number one cause of unnatural death, oh, I guess we must suffer. I guess we must just suffer our fates. Like, it's just inevitable. We're just going to suffer forever. And, well, it doesn't matter. We can solve it. We can help the system, but it's just going to come back again. There's nothing we can do about it because, it's got to exist. So right. It's like, whoa. It's like, do you want to try to change the system? Do you want to see what other alternatives are out there? What other options are possible? So what's the other option to blind obedience? Thinking for yourself. Is thinking for yourself better than blind obedience? Well, instead of being manipulated into doing things that you don't want to be done, take, for example, bullying. As a kid, we learned that, you shouldn't tolerate bullies. If somebody's bullying you, you either have to get away if you can, right, because they're trying to coerce you.
Yep.
Or you try to tell others, you educate them, say, hey, look, there's this bully and he's trying to bully other people. And ultimately that bully will learn. And one way or another, maybe you even have to stand up to the bully, as the slaves had to do themselves, to say, hey, I'm not a slave. I'm not going to be a victim of a bully. I'm not going to let the bully me or the slave master to enslave me. Same exact dynamic, because you're being coerced against your will. And again, even if you want the bully to bully you, which most people are not, right. But if you do, because the bully has gotten you to just be that person that they bully all the time, you probably still would rather that you were free. You would still live in a much better life if you were living what life you're intended to live, which is one not bound to the chains of another, not one bound to the life of another,
right.
By by this sort of servitude, even voluntary or not. So if you are blind obedient, if you're statist, if you're following orders, that question remains: is following orders something that's moral to do? Because if you're just following orders, you're not questioning for yourself what is right and wrong. You're not questioning what is moral to do. But if you are, then following orders is irrelevant, because you're following what is right and wrong.
Exactly.
So same thing with natural law in relation to man's law. If man's law aligns to natural law or the truth or morality, then what's the point of man's law? And if man's law is against natural law or truth or reality, or freedom, then it's we must disobey. We must not follow that law because it's tyrannical. It's going to contribute to slavery. So either way, there is no good or natural or healthy condition for which man's law can control everybody and tell
I
them what to do
agree.
in life.
100%. And just to wrap it up, because I know that we are, I'm thank you so much, Corey, because I know that I'm keeping you a little longer than we thought, but I'm just really enjoying this. And I just think it's so important that we talk about these things. And so I really thank you for that. I learned so much from your book and from talking to you and watching your videos. I really have. And it's a great thing. And so to wrap it up, like just on the points that we were making, I see a lot of people that live in this state of denial that this isn't going on. And I'm sure there's going to be people that maybe even watch this and think this, they're really over exaggerating. This isn't going on. And they're in this state of denial. And I think that that's really dangerous when you live in this state of denial, because I think it's denial that got us into a lot of this mess, that people just are kind of turning away and just not even looking at it and just kind of denying it. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, first things first is I'm not trying to tell anybody to believe me,
Right.
or to take what I say as the truth. All I'm saying is that nobody can be the truth, or that nobody should have their opinions or beliefs imposed on others, including
Right.
my own.
Yep.
So that's the funny question, is like, oh, I'm in denial, but I'm not telling you what to believe. I want you to look into it for yourself. I have resources, I have books and videos, and you make up your own mind. I'm not telling you what to think. You are the one that's in control of your own mind.
Yep.
You say you're not a slave, right? So you should be able to come up with your own mind and your own decisions and your own knowledge and evaluate things for yourself and sort of filter through all the nonsense that you see, right? Or all the
Very important.
contradictions or what have you. That's important. I encourage you to criticize me, to think critically, to find what flaws may be. And then you know what? It also helps me become a better person.
Yep.
So I look for it. That being said, there's also work on part of yourself to really observe the world around you and to think about the things that we've talked about and the questions that I propose, throughout my books and throughout a lot of my works. I pose a lot of questions on purpose, because questions help us question for ourselves if ourselves are contributing to any of the problems we see. Because again, we were talking about how it's ultimately on ourselves to change things.
Correct.
And as above, so below as above. If you want to change things and change things in the world, you have to start with yourself. You can't go around telling other people how to live their lives unless you start doing it yourself or understanding it yourself. I can't go up here and say I know anything without having some sort of foundation of knowledge that I obtained for myself. And that's why I share it in forms of books and materials. But I'm just a fellow human being, and you're a fellow human being. You have stuff to share. So share it. I encourage that. And if anybody wants to collaborate, I'm open to it. If anybody wants to contribute anything, I have tons of resources, a newspaper, a summit, and what have you. I have it all. And documentaries on every specific topic. So look into it. And then at least you can say that you looked into it. At least understand where we're coming from. So that way, when you do refute us and say that we're wrong, you know exactly why we are wrong or why we believe what we believe.
Right.
Because you studied it, you understand it. Instead of just saying, "Oh, well, it's all wrong. It's all nonsense." Like, no, like actually looking to understand it. Because obviously, I spent years detailing the same stuff. I've spent years putting work into this. So obviously I deeply believe it. I deeply understand it. And same thing with you, and same thing with a lot of others. We spent a lot of time investing into this knowledge. So clearly it's not something that we're trying to market, or something we're trying to make money off of. I mean, I'm not making any money. If
Me
anything, I'm
neither.
losing. But it's not something we're doing for identity either. I mean, we care about what we're talking about. Like, do I want to talk about slavery? Do you think I want to talk about evil things? Do you think I want to ruin the reputation of the abolitionists of the past? I'm not. In fact, I'm just continuing what they said, and that's why I use their quotes. I'm not distorting their words at all. I'm using exactly what their words are saying, and I'm saying this is exactly what they said.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not changing anything of what they said. I'm not twisting their words. They ended chattel slavery, but there's other forms, and they told us, not me. They did, and they lived in that time period. They were the ones who changed it. So learn from them, not just me. Learn from all the people, and then make up your own mind for yourself.
I agree 100%. That was so well said, Corey. And I agree. I always tell people that too. Like, don't just believe people that you're watching, and that you have to do your own research. I think that's so important. And I think that that's something that's lacking. And there's a lot of reasons. I get that a lot of it's by design with all the distractions that they have out there. And you can name 1,000 distractions that they have for people. And I think it is to stop people from looking into these topics and diving into them. I think that that's what the system fears the most, is the things that we talk about and other people that are talking about these things bring to the table and start discussing. I think that's this knowledge fears. That's what they fear. They don't want people learning about these things. So I think that it's so important that, and I agree 100%, like I said, that you have to do your own research, look into it for yourself. That it's so important, and something I do every day. I'm always looking into things for myself, and you can't just believe. You have to, and then implement it into your life too when you start learning about it. Like in the case of natural law, I found that, when I learned about that, you start implementing into your life. It's very important. I agree.
Yeah, let me just remind people, we're doing the exact opposite of imposing our opinion. All we want is that other people's opinions are not being imposed upon us. Yep. That's it. That's all I'm saying. That's all I'm asking for, is nobody's being coerced against their own will, and nobody's being coerced, period. Yep. And nobody is being violently suppressed in their freedom of expression, their ability to be free, that all people should be free. Mm-hmm. Are these hard things to understand or controvert, or are you going to make a justification? And is that justification based on morality? Probably not.
Right, I agree. So just to wrap this up, Corey, I just want to give you the floor and can you let people know about your work, where they can find it? I'll make sure I put links in the description, guys, for sure, so you can find all of these, what he's going to mention quickly. But let anybody know what you're working on, what you have going on. The floor is yours for the next few minutes. Just let everybody know what's going on.
So I have always a lot of projects going on, a lot of things I don't always like to talk about because I like to, surprise people. But that being said, other books and other projects and documentaries, I do encourage people check out my philosophy documentary that I'm putting out soon, that goes deep into the philosophy and science of natural law, or objective morality, what I like to just call natural morality, because it really just goes through all of it, through so many nice, beautiful perspectives throughout time and history that I just think are really, really crucial, because then it can open the minds of everybody, not just the people who currently teach the knowledge, but the people who are completely new to it. And so that's why that's a really good watch. I have many other documentaries, like, why society works perfectly without government, which might surprise people. But hey, check it out, watch it. You are already a real anarchist and don't realize it. That's another good one. Of course, I use the word abolitionist. That's what I refer to myself, to even go even further, to say, hey, we're ending slavery. We're not just ending rulers, because that's what anarch-on means. We're ending slavery. The fact that there can be masters or rulers or slaves. No, we don't want any of that. So abolition says, hey, get rid of the action of slavery, and therefore you're getting rid of the condition of slavery. You just look out my works, Cory Endrulat. So just Cory, Nature is the Answer is probably the best way to find me. Just Cory, Nature is the Answer. And for action, for anybody who wants to learn about action, go to nita.one, because there's plenty of action material there. You have a learn button and an act button. Really simple, really straight to the point. So definitely go there for action, because that is never talked about ever. So
that's true.
So yeah, go there. I would recommend that as well. But it's another to know the truth, and another to know how to act for the truth. So I can't fit both of those in most interviews and things that I do. But I have, again, special videos and stuff about that. For example, I have another video that says must see 4 steps to change the world, or 4 steps to total freedom. Sorry. Right. And that one goes into the education that's necessary, what action steps. It's really simple, more simple than people think. And it's very similar to what the slaves did on the plantation. Is like, first you learn, you have to gather other people, and then you just act, And it sounds easy. It's not obviously that easy to put necessarily in practice, but with enough resources and with enough people, it does become easy, just like
Yep.
anything else you practice and develop. So that's it. Taplink.cc/Cory Health. That's taplink.cc/Cory Health. You have all my links, everything.
Perfect. So they can find you there, and that's amazing, Cory. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to come in.
Sure.
Once again,
This is my book, of course.
oh, for sure. Yeah, I'll be plugging that at the end. Don't worry, my friend. I already got it here.
I just wanted to. I didn't know. You don't have to plug it. It's up to you.
No, I want to. It's an amazing book, and I really hope people do pick it up and read it, because I think it's gonna really answer a lot and get them on the right path. So I'm definitely gonna recommend it. I'll make sure I put a link in the description too, so where they can find your book, so they can definitely pick it up. And I just, like I was saying, I want to thank you, Cory, because I think the work you're doing is amazing, and I really think that people need to check it out, because I've learned so much. So as I was saying, you can find you on YouTube, definitely. I'll leave a link for that. And you're also on One Great Work Network with 59 other amazing creators who are putting out a lot of great work. And so I'll make sure there's a link for that too. I want people to find you and start looking into your work, Cory.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, my friend. And you're always welcome back. I tell you that every time. I told you that on the radio. If you ever want to come back and there's any topics that you think are really important, you want to cover, or you want to talk about anything that you have going on in the future, you're always welcome here, my friend.
Okay. Thank you, man. I appreciate that. I think you're an awesome interviewer. Like I said to you before, off of this, and for people who are watching, I just like your voice, man. You do a good job. And he always tells me, he's like, man, I'm new to this stuff. I'm like, no, dude, don't worry. You're doing great. So guys, give him some support, because he's good at what he does.
Thank you so much. I'm embarrassed now. But no, that's great. So I'll make sure that all the links are in there, guys. And once again, thank you so much, Cory. And you have a great evening. You know I will keep in touch with you. So
always.
I'll be keeping in touch, my friend.
Thank you.
All right, take care, my friend.
Take care.
Well, there we have it. I tell you, what an amazing man, and what great information that he was just talking about. I mean, it's so powerful. I think that this is something that people really need to look into, and I'm so thankful. Thank you, Cory, once again. I can't thank you enough, and I can't thank my other guest enough for taking the time and come here on my channel and talk about these topics that I think need to be discussed way more than they are. And so I really appreciate everybody that comes on here and brings their knowledge, discusses it, and it's so valuable to me, and I can never thank people enough. I really can't. And I really thank you, all of you that are listening and watching. I appreciate all of you guys so much too for taking the time to come and watch my interviews and go to my radio station, my show on the radio, and listen to the shows and my guests there. I just really appreciate it, and think it's so important, especially more now than ever. And as I promised, I told Cory I was going to actually show his book again, and I will make sure there's a link, guys, for you to pick that up. It's kind of bright in here now because I got different lighting in here, but here we go. Slavery Gone for Good. And I will definitely make sure, as I said, there's a link. So I really suggest you guys pick this up. It is going to really point you in the right direction. And please check out all the links in the description for his website, and for his YouTube channel, and on the One Great Work Network. I'll make sure that's all available, guys. And before I go, I just also want to bring up here, actually, if I go ahead and minimize this, that will take away some of that brightness. There we go. Now I can probably show the book a little bit better. I forgot that on my second screen there. So there we go. That's what it looks like. So not as bright there, because yeah, my other monitor was really drowning out so there you go. So definitely pick that up. I'm really enjoying it. And before I go, I just want a couple announcements here. You can, if you enjoy radio format, as I let you guys know, you can find me on Revolution Radio. That's every Monday evening from 6 p.m. till 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And I'm in Studio A. And I have a lot of great guests. I've had Cory on as a guest just recently. We had a great discussion there. If you do want to see my past interviews on Revolution Radio, just go to the archives section, and it walks you through how to get into the archive. There's show archives, all the shows I've done, and if you find other hosts on there that you enjoy their content, they pretty much going 24/7. Lots of great creators on there talking about many, many different topics. So there's something there for everyone. You're definitely going to find something there to listen to, and especially if you like radio, which I do. I was raised on radio, listening to the radio, so I really enjoy listening to the radio. And while I'm doing cleaning or working out in my garden or just sitting out in the yard, I like that format. So hopefully you guys do too, and you'll check that out. And as I said, you can find my past shows with a lot of the guests I've had on here and video interviews I've had on my radio show too. And so just go to the archive section. It's all available, guys. So hopefully you'll check that out. I think it's a great thing to support. Freedom is very well alive at Revolution Radio. There's not many any topic you can get into. It's not censored like it is on a lot of these platforms where you have to be very careful of what you talk about or what your show's about, or it's I'm preaching to people about that because everybody knows that quickly they'll pull down a video or delete your channel. So you got to be careful. Not like that when you're on the radio. I love it. I really do enjoy that format. And the last thing here is, if I can bring it up. Why is it not coming up here? This is weird. It did come up earlier. All right, maybe I won't be able to bring it up here. All right, let's see here. Okay, there we go. I got it working now for you there, guys. So there we go, September 10th and 11th. I got to take my glasses. I got to take my glasses off, guys, because I got to use my glasses to read things up close. But further away, I got to take them off. So there we go, September 10th and 11th. We got Convergence, United for Freedom, Focused on Action. Amazing speakers are going to be doing presentations. I really hope that you guys definitely go and register. It's free. It's a free online event. Just go to freedomundernaturallaw.com. So many great speakers, as you can see. A lot of them I have interviewed on here. So if you do want to see any names on there that you would like to see some interviews I did, I've done quite a few. I've interviewed a lot of the people on here. And hope to have them back on my show again because, as I keep telling you guys, they just bring such important information, and I just have amazing discussions with them and learn so much. So definitely, please, guys, go. It's, as it says, it's a free online event. Just got to register. freedomundernaturallaw.com. Lots of great speakers. Definitely something I hope all of you check out. And as you can see, I'll be doing a presentation there. It'll be the first presentation I've ever done in this format. This is very new to me, doing a presentation like this, but I'm looking forward to the challenge, and, am excited to do it. So hopefully you guys will check it out, guys. I think it'll be worth your time for sure. So there we go. Now that I'm done talking and talking at the end, as I seem to do, but I just really enjoy doing this, and I hope you guys enjoy coming and checking it out and listening and learning a lot of important things. So I thank you guys so much. Don't forget, I also do I always forget to mention, I do a live show with my co-host Cass. That's Saturday evenings, usually around 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and that is a live show. So definitely come check it out. You can ask some questions in the chat if you want, or give us your thoughts, and I think that is pretty cool. I'm starting to do live shows. I do pretty much all my stuff is pre-recorded for YouTube here and my other channels, or my other platforms that I put it on. But radio is definitely live, obviously. But so I'm starting to do a little bit of live stuff on YouTube here, and I have a great co-host. We cover a lot of topics that I talk about on here all the time. So check it out. It's a lot of fun. I think we've done 5 weeks now. Maybe we're going to be on week 6. And it's usually about an hour and a half. So a lot of fun. Now, like I said, that's Saturday evenings, 9:30 p.m. And we usually go, like I said, for about an hour and a half. So check it out, guys. And thank you once again so much. I appreciate everyone that comes here. I enjoy this, and I meet so many amazing people, such as Corey and all the others I've had on, that are just amazing people, putting out amazing content, and I hope you guys are enjoying this as much as I am, because I really am, guys. So thank you so much. I hope you guys have a great day, evening, wherever it is you are, and I'll definitely be back very soon. I got lots of great interviews lined up with a lot of very amazing guest, both for radio and here on the YouTube channel. So please, subscribe, hit the notifications so you'll know when I post another interview. And that'll be super cool if you do that for me. Thank you so much, guys. Take care. Look after each other. And I'll see you very soon. Peace, guys.
Are you interested in the paranormal, murder mysteries, cryptocurrency, and thought-provoking interviews? Then check out Crypt Rick's I've Been Thinking on YouTube, or every Monday night at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Studio A at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. Welcome to the Crypt.